Judy Katz is an autistic speaker, trainer, and instructional designer with decades of experience creating accessible, inclusive learning solutions in leadership, DEI, and communication. She helps organizations better understand and support neurodivergent employees to foster more effective, inclusive workspaces. This session in particular, like in the curriculum entirely, I was really interested in this one, Judy. Introduction to Managing Neurodivergence. I don't think we've had anything like this in any of the previous four that we've done. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And everybody, please help me welcome Judy, and I'll go ahead and hide myself from the screen.
Hi, thank you, Louise. Thank you so much for having me here. I love TLDC's conferences. It's always, we were chatting beforehand. We were joking that Louise was joking that he hadn't even really done a whole lot of marketing for this conference. But I feel like you've been doing this for so many years now, and you're doing such a good job and giving back to the community in such amazing ways that I feel like people know that these are coming around and they're going to be so good, so quality. And it's just these conferences are a known quantity that you do. So thank you so much for having me. And, I love that you said that this is such a different topic because it totally is. I went back and forth about, whether to offer this because it's not necessarily the most obvious topic to talk about when, for a conference that attracts a lot of instructional designers, learning technologists, and stuff like that. So what does managing neurodivergence have to do with creating accessible and inclusive learning experiences? So I think that I've been an instructional designer for decades, and it's always so special when you turn that corner where you can really say you've been doing something for decades, or you did something decades ago. But yeah, I've been doing this for a really long time. And one of the things that I noticed when I started focusing more on neurodivergence, and this is really, my main focus now, is that there is accessibility, there is inclusion, and part of that is the actual content that we teach. Are we putting in our communication courses, for example, that people should make eye contact? Because if we are inadvertently reinforcing ableist beliefs and not being inclusive toward autistics, for example, who may have a lot of difficulty maintaining eye contact, may find it very distracting or even impossible to do. So I like this topic for the content that it provides for those of us who may develop manager training or employee experiences. I know some of you here are in employee engagement and employee experience, and also for the parts of management and organizational culture that we really participate in, and help reinforce and help create as learning and development people. And also because, of course, you might be in this position yourself of managing a team that includes neurodivergence, which you don't necessarily know, or you might be neurodivergent yourself, and working on managerial skills or self-management. And I hope that some of this is useful to you in that process as well. So, oh, Jacqueline, thank you for your kind words. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat, and I will at least pause throughout and try to take some questions. So please feel free to pop those questions into the chat as often as you would like, and we will circle around a few times during the session today, and try to address those questions as we go through. I love having some discussion, and I love seeing your responses as well. When we're in webinar mode like this, I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but I can see the chat, but I can't see you. I can't see, your facial expressions, your reactions on screen. So I love it when people use those emojis. If you appreciate a joke, give me a thumbs up or laugh or a heart or something like that. Otherwise, it just sort of feels like I'm telling jokes into the void. So I love that, you have the ability to be off camera, especially as somebody who works on neuro inclusion and neuro accessibility. Excuse me. I really try to practice what I preach and not, try to force people to be on camera. So in webinar mode, you get to kind of sit back and relax. But also, I love to get that feedback too. So please use the chat, please use the emojis. Let me know that you're here and where you want us to take this. I love this for the number of cats. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get to see people's cats and dogs and maybe kids and everything today, but I appreciate you showing up as much as you can, even despite the webinar mode. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in, and we will talk about. Oh, for some reason, did the screen share just disappear for y'all? Uh, what is happening here? It did. I don't know what happened, but let's try again. All right.
Yeah, it did disappear for me too.
Thank you so much, Luis. I appreciate you popping in there. Okay, you can see it again? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, and whenever I advance the screen, it is disappearing, which is I know what it is. Oh my goodness. It is a me issue. I was at the end of my presentation, not at the beginning, so it was going ahead and closing it up. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into the beginning of the presentation, and we'll talk about what we're going to talk about today. So, generally, when we're starting to talk about managerial topics here, there are a few different issues that we want to address. I start almost all of my sessions with a foundational understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about neurodivergence. And so we are going to talk about that to make sure that we're really level setting and getting on the same page. And then we're going to talk about a few different issues related to, a few different categories of issues. There's really so much to talk about when it comes to any kind of personal interactions and how different brains can manage those personal interactions differently. And in fact, when I started giving sessions on management, this topic just grew and grew and grew. I kind of had to start talking faster and faster and, trying to wedge in more and more topics. And now I offer like a half day on this. So I started offering this kind of intro to the public to give us a taste of these different categories of where we're going to go. So after we talk about foundations, we'll talk about some issues with hiring and onboarding, personal interactions while on the job, and then productivity. Again, when we talk about neurodivergence, we're talking about a very, very broad range of topics and ways that this can show up. So there are all kinds of things to talk about, and we're just going to touch on some of the top things that people find most useful when delving into this topic. So let's start with, let's start with foundations. I don't know what that. I had to rebrand and redo some of my slides, some of my presentations recently, so I might still be finding a couple of nits. I apologize for that. So we're going into foundations and just starting with sort of level setting our language. I do use the word neurodivergent most of the time instead of neurodiverse, and I know that you might see all kinds of different things out on the TikTok and the LinkedIn and whatever. You definitely, I think you still see a lot of people talking about neurodiversity when I would really use the word neurodivergent. And here's the difference for me. Neurodivergent means that your brain is significantly different from the typical in some way. And that's, again, the words that we would use to describe non-neurodivergent brains are neurotypical, not normal, because there's a whole, judgment and everything associated with that. But there is sort of a typical way of functioning and being, or range of typical, and then divergent falls outside of that. You can't be you're one or the other. And when you talk about diversity, that word describes a group of people or a group of investments or a group of things. It really shouldn't be used to describe a single person. So, for example, you would never say, well, they're a diverse candidate that you're hiring. That hopefully would be considered offensive, to use the word diverse to describe outside of the mainstream. So neurodivergent is the word to use. Now, of course, if you're talking about a group of people who are, some of them are neurodivergent and some of them are neurotypical, then go ahead and say neurodiverse. And then that's accurate. You're using an accurate word to describe a group of people. So just making sure. Um, um, well, okay. So a question here, will we be talking about supporting our peers? To some extent, yes. I think a lot of these things actually will be applicable to talking about peers as well. And my concept of management is, maybe a little bit less of a, hierarchical, power dynamic kind of thing. So I think a lot of these things are very applicable to peer support as well. So yes, I hope you'll get a lot of benefit from out of it from that perspective as well. All right, so yeah, absolutely. Hey, you know what? I am used to people wanting to know what we are going to do ahead of time, and I think that that is great to try to level set those things. And if it's not done, to try to do that for yourself. I love it. Okay, so just to level set our language a little bit, I will be talking about neurodivergent. I just want to close that up with a final note that I don't think there's any reason to use a euphemism for neurodivergent. I don't think that, I think that that's the reason that neurodiverse is used a lot. People like the feel of it, like you need to make divergent kind of better somehow. But I think divergent is fine on its own. And when we talk about neurodivergence, we are talking about a huge range of different neurotypes. And within that, even a huge range of different presentations. You're talking about literally the entire ICD-10, as well as things that we might consider more physical brain differences like migraine disorder. So really any significant way that the brain is different could be considered neurodivergence. And neurodivergence, I don't want to get into too much into like medical and diagnostic talk here, because neurodivergence is not a medical concept. It is a community concept that was born out of advocacy communities. So really it is very, very encompassing. And when we talk about neurodivergence, we're talking about a huge different range of types of brains. People tend to think of it as just autism or maybe autism and ADHD. We are going to focus on things that are generally in this, broad, idea of the things that the public are very interested in and aware of. So trauma, autism, ADHD, anxiety, most of, the things that we're going to talk about are within that range. However, many things will be applicable to lots and lots of different neurotypes. And a concept that I want to bring in, and the reason that I don't feel like we have to use, euphemisms when we talk about neurodivergence and when we talk about disability, is that I like to think in terms of the social model of disability, as opposed to the medical model. The medical model says that this is your diagnosis, and you are deficient in this way. The social model of disability came again out of disability advocacy, and basically says that the disability is or are the barriers in society, the gaps between where we are and what society was designed for. And that's what really disables us. And it took a long time for me to really adopt that internally and think of myself as disabled and think of fight my own internal ableism and really think of that as, this is okay. But that is it is an understanding of the social model of disability that really helped me do that. And if you're trying to get away from using euphemisms like neurodiverse or on the spectrum, or there are lots of different euphemisms out there, then you might want to think about this and really reflect a lot on the social model of disability. Or something that I hear a lot is organizations might say, instead of having a disability ERG, or using the word disability internally, they might say differently abled, or it's the ability network, and there are lots of, cartwheels that people and organizations tend to turn, to try to not use the word disability. And it comes from a good place. I want to recognize that. It comes from a very, very well-meaning place. However, it's not always necessary. And it's not always, sometimes just using a euphemism in itself implies that there is something wrong that needs to be euphemized. So we're trying to move away from that. And I like to introduce the social model of disability as a way of, moving your brain and your belief systems away from that. So, and it also confirms, for me, that what we're doing here today is we're actually removing disability by taking one step closer to bridging that gap, to removing those barriers and creating a more accessible and inclusive environment in our workplaces. So before we move on, are there any questions that people just want to pop into the chat? I'm going to try to keep going pretty quickly, but just taking a quick look. Okay, not seeing any questions, so we're going to move on. Feel free to pop those into the chat whenever you have them. Oh, so actually, one more thing. I do want to point out also that neurodivergence isn't always about disability, or about deficits. There are lots and lots of benefits that different kinds of neurodivergence bring to the job. It wasn't that many years ago that just it seemed like every job description was saying, oh, we want out of the box thinkers. Well, autistics in particular are incredibly, lateral thinking oriented. They come up with different solutions. People also may think of neurodivergence as very, introverted. That's not always the case at all, especially with ADHDers. ADHDers can be very social, very motivational to a team. And there are all sorts of strengths, and differences can very much be strengths that neurodivergence bring to the job. Okay, quick note about neurospicy. I'm neutral to it. I know a lot of people love it. I have heard more and more um, uh, resistance to it lately. I think, and I can understand that under the umbrella of, you don't have to have a euphemism. I think that if you're talking about yourself, nobody should get to tell you how you talk about yourself. So if you are, if you're using that to describe your own brain, then nobody should be able to tell you how to do that. Similarly, you don't get to tell anybody else how they should describe their own brain, their own characteristics. So that's where I would come out. I do think that it does tend to, sound like a euphemism, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with saying neurodivergent. Yeah. All right. Thanks. Lots of good comments and questions already. I love how much everybody is throwing in and participating here. Okay, so a few thoughts on hiring and onboarding. There are ways to make your hiring and onboarding processes more inclusive. And we're going to go through this pretty quickly. I'm going to give you some resources too, so that you can continue this after the fact. Because, like I said, there's so much we could squeeze in today. Just a few thoughts about job descriptions. You know how job descriptions sometimes specifically say such and such groups are encouraged to apply. You can include neurodivergence in that, to encourage them. You may have heard some if you've studied job descriptions, if you studied like bias in job descriptions, you may have heard things along the lines of women tend to be less likely to apply if they don't feel like specifically welcomed in some ways, or hitting that third bullet, if they don't meet all of the job descriptions. Neurodivergence can be as well. So let's go through these bullets. Include neurodivergence in the encourage to apply section. Excuse me. State what neurodivergent friendly benefits that you have, which might include flexible work schedules, might include wellness benefits, definitely might include working from home, or working remotely. There are lots of benefits there for neurodivergence, including being able to manage our own sensory spaces. You might notice whenever I'm on webinars, this is the brightest my office ever gets. So that, because I really have to manage my sensory inputs. And that's a huge benefit for neurodivergence. So things that benefits that you have at your organization that are neurodivergent friendly, state those, and make sure your job descriptions are actually literal. That if you are listing something as a requirement, that is an actual requirement of the job. And if that's not the case, or if you want to encourage people to apply despite, maybe they don't think they meet all of the requirements, then you can say something like that in the job description, and that will encourage more neurodivergence and more women to apply as well. So a few things you can do there for job descriptions. Onboarding. I actually have an article on this on my website, and there are lots and lots of things that you can do in the onboarding process to make that more emotionally safe for neurodivergents, to make sure that they really know what they're doing, and to really set them up for success within their first 30, 60, 90 days on the job. Things like giving them, very, very clear instructions about, what the expectations are. Helping them facilitate social connections with their peers. They're things that, understanding that you can have regarding changes that they might be experiencing in terms of getting a new job and having to change lifestyle, change medications, or, something along those lines. There are lots of things to be aware of with neurodivergence. So there's a lot to cover there. So I just want to point you toward a resource that you might find helpful. So it's neurodivergentworking.com. I don't have a ton of articles and blog posts and things up there, so it's under the articles section. Um, and particularly, I want to point out in the onboarding process the whole idea of setting up job expectations. So I think that this reference that I have on screen might be getting a tiny bit dated at this point, but it is from Office Space. We'll start with the meme, of course, at the bottom, where this is from Office Space, where Jennifer Aniston's boss at Flingers is telling her, we need to talk about your flair. So if you're as old as I am and you've seen this movie, you know that her boss at Flingers has counted all of the pieces of flair that she wears to work, and it's required to have something like 37 pieces of flair, and she's only wearing 37 pieces of flair. So she gets called on the carpet for only doing, what's the basic expectation. Well, usually don't think of Jennifer Aniston in neurodivergent roles, but this is a very neurodivergent moment of, you told me that this is what I had to do, so this is what I'm doing. And this happens with neurodivergence a lot, that people, the company or the manager will actually expect something more, but we think that this is, what we're doing. I kind of actually hate this analogy because, Jennifer Aniston in the movie is not doing this because she's neurodivergent. She's doing this because this is a crappy job and she has a bad attitude. Or she has an unexpected attitude about it. But it does illustrate what happens a lot, that, companies will actually expect going above and beyond, and that isn't necessarily understood for somebody who is thinking more literally about, like, this is the job expectation. Um, if something is an actual expectation on the job, you want to make sure that that is stated as an expectation. And honestly, side note, companies don't do this a lot because they can't legally tell you you have to work 60 hours a week or whatever that above and beyond means. They will just act like you have a bad attitude if you don't do it. And that's your mileage may vary. If people who are very literal are not necessarily going to do that unless they actually have a passion for it. In which case, all bets are off. They're down the rabbit holes. They're giving their all, 100 hours a week. So that basic moral of the story, make sure that when you state expectations, those are actual expectations. And those are literally what is expected, and you aren't, indirectly expecting something different from your employees. Oh, that's only fair. Personal interactions is another category where people sometimes come to me with issues, where you have people with very different brains, doing very different things, expecting very different things. And this can particularly be the case when it comes to empathy. A lot of times, managers will come to me and say, well, this person doesn't seem to have any empathy. And that can mean a lot of different things. And I am, oh, whoa, I'm sorry. We're not starting with empathy. We're starting with communication. My bad. All right. So that's a MacGuffin. We'll get there. All right. So we're going to talk first then about communication principles, which of course is communication can be very, people can communicate very different ways based on a lot of different things, based on their age, their nationality, their gender, their race, how they were brought up, their culture, and also based on neurodivergence. I again have like this is another one that has kind of blown up and gotten to be a really big course that I offer, but a lot of it is based on these basic principles that anyone can adopt to communicate well, whether you are neurodivergent, or no matter what kind of neurodivergent you are, and or whether you are neurotypical. And so, Charlotte, I love that comment. I am also very direct. And to me, it is kind when other people are direct because it saves all of that frustration that I might otherwise have. And so I love very direct communication. And not everyone does. And this is, uh, there's a whole concept. We don't have time to go through the entire thing today. But if you have seen anything on social media about or being passed around, I think there are Substack articles that are pretty good talking about ask culture versus guess culture. And basically, the idea is that there are different types of cultural expectations. And this is not just ethnic culture. This can be Southern culture where I was raised as opposed to, Northeast United States culture, which tends to be much more direct. And basically, the idea is that there is a culture where you are asking or telling what you want, which is direct, versus guessing and making other people guess, which is very indirect. And so, for example, I'll just use what I said, the different regions within the United States. The South tends to be very, very guess. The Northeast tends to be very ask. I am a very ask person, and part of that is that I am autistic, or I'm sorry, I'm a very ask and tell direct person. And part of that is because I'm autistic. And so, having moved away from, where I'm from, most people actually guess that I'm from the East Coast, and I've just lost my accent because I'm a very direct person. So being direct, means that you're not relying on implications and inferences. You are just saying what needs to be said. And that doesn't have to be, unkind at all. In fact, oh, I'm sorry, I'll get there. But at its basic core, you are saying the thing that needs to be said. The next one, literal, is about how you're saying it. You're saying the thing that needs to be said, and you're using plain language, literal language to say it, avoiding jargon, idioms, exaggerations, all of those things that might kind of soften the fact that you are saying, or might be fun, or might be just jargon, might be just because you're very immersed in, industry terminology. As much as possible, try to avoid those things and make your communication very literal. It can be hard for a while to sort of tell the difference between direct and literal, but as you practice these things, you will understand it more. Direct is that you're saying the thing, and literal means you are saying the thing in a plain, literal way. And also, I think this is particularly important for people in learning and development. Use correct or completed examples to show what good looks like, rather than just explaining abstractly what good looks like. This is particularly crucial for autistics, who tend to construct their ideas of what is correct from worked examples, rather than, you can give me the rule book and I can construct meaning from that. We tend to be very based on those concrete examples. So I think that it's an extra lift. It's not something that all instructional designers do, but take the time to actually show what good looks like. But it is so important for people who are more of bottom-up processors instead of top-down processors. Um, so I am actually I'm gonna dive into this because I live in Portland, Oregon now. I'm in the Northwest, so I want to see what you have to say. I'm from the Northwest currently, and currently in the South. It's very confusing. Okay, so what is really interesting to me about this is that I live in Portland now. I have a lot of friends from the East, or Northeast, and they think that the Northwest is very passive and indirect. And it took me years to figure out what that meant, because I'm from the South, and comparatively, the Northwest is not indirect. Comparatively, the Northwest is very direct, and the South is I would think, within the United States, the most indirect, most passive, most concerned about nice area of the United States. Now, that's not kind. There's a difference. We could get into a lot of stuff here, but very, very indirect communication, and it absolutely boils my brain. It's very, very frustrating for me. I love that. Yes, jargon is alienating by design. I know that as communicators, as instructional designers, we hear that. And I just want to reinforce it here that, jargon, I think that people use it because it also almost feels like you're in the in crowd if you know the jargon, and then you just get really used to saying it. But understand that if you're in the in crowd, somebody's in the out crowd. If they are not, if they're new to the job or whatever. So try not to use that, especially for people who are newer. Um, yeah, okay, so let's talk about this, how direct is often taken as mean, because this next item is kind. Just because you are being direct does not mean that you are mean. And I think that autistics in particular tend to be very direct communicators, and therefore we get this reputation for being mean. But I want to tell you that when I was developing these communication principles and working with neurodivergent groups, in, trying to hone them and make sure that I was including everything that needed to be included, kind came from autistics. And kind, in particular, people said that I understand that my directness is taken as being mean. And so I want to, I'm always working on being kind as part of that directness. And it can be a little bit of a balance because so much of our concept of what is kind is really using euphemisms, using very passive language, using indirect language. So it can be challenging to try to figure that out. The other thing that autistics tended to say is that yes, I'm autistic and I am a direct communicator. I'm also traumatized from being an autistic, which is an almost universal experience. And therefore, I want people to be kind to me too. I don't want people to use directness as an excuse for being brutal. Again, we associate honesty with directness, and we associate honesty with the phrase brutal honesty. Honesty doesn't have to be brutal. Honesty can be kind. Honesty can be creative. Honesty can be funny, and it does not have to be brutal. And I really love that idea that, I don't want people to hide behind this excuse of I was just being honest as an excuse for being unkind and for not, caring how you're coming across to others. All right, I'm going to take a quick look at the chat here before we go on. Um, Yes, don't mistake kindness as weakness. Yeah, there's a lot of good things that I would love to talk about all day, and particularly in this whole range of being direct and being kind and figuring out that balance. Okay. And now, apologies. Let's see this in action a little bit. I love Amelia Bedelia. Has anybody ever read Amelia Bedelia books as a child, or maybe you've read them to a child in your life? Okay, so Amelia Bedelia is a very autistic coded character. We don't know whether she's autistic or not, but she sure seems autistic. And I'm going to tell a lot of people who I don't know you at all. I don't know what you know or don't know about your brain. But for everybody saying that they can relate, I'm just saying that all of my friends on Facebook who are relating to all of my neurodivergent memes over the years, they start to get the idea. So that's all I'm going to say there. But this is a spread from an Amelia Bedelia book where we can examine this communication. So Amelia Bedelia was told to pitch a tent. And she has her helpers there, Mike and Harry, I think. And so let's start with her. And they pitched that tent. Hooray, said Amelia Bedelia. We did it. And Mike says, maybe we should pitch it again. This is a sentence we want to focus on. Maybe we should pitch it again, said Mike. Why? Said Amelia Bedelia. It's in the bushes, said Harry. That's a good place for it, said Amelia Bedelia. It's out of the way. So, what I want to focus on here is that Mike said maybe we should pitch it again. There's a lot of softening language in here. There's a lot of ways that Mike is trying to be kind, but he's not being very direct and he's not being very literal. First of all, saying pitch a tent is when you mean assemble a tent, is not being very literal. And that's where Amelia Bedelia messes up a lot, is that people are using idioms that she doesn't understand. Draw the drapes or draw the bath or, whatever, pitch a tent. So, but I want to focus on what Mike says because he's sort of representing the neurotypical here. Maybe when he really means definitely you did it wrong. We you really means you. Should pitch it again means you should redo it instead of you should do it again, because you did it wrong. So there are all kinds of things that Mike is using to soften his language. And Amelia Bedelia just doesn't get it. Why? That's a good place for it. It's out of the way. And so she not only doesn't understand the original instructions, she doesn't understand the correction because Mike has not honed his skills in giving direct, literal, and kind feedback to Amelia Bedelia. And he should really say something like, that's not what they meant. We should do this instead if he's going to participate, or you should do this instead. And of course, you can always add, as a manager, as a peer, you can always add things like, I understand where you went wrong there, or I understand the misunderstanding here. What they really mean was this, there are things that you can do to make that kinder, without being indirect and without using jargon or being unliteral. All right, now we get to empathy. And you may have figured out so far already that I love using memes. I love using pop culture references. Love using things that you may have seen in the past. This one's a little bit more current. Does anybody know from the living room that we're looking at what show we're going to talk about, or what character? Oh, not Friends. I don't think I've ever heard. I don't think I've ever gotten Friends, but yes, we are going to talk about The Big Bang Theory, and Sheldon. Okay, Sheldon is another very autistic coded character. He is not canon autistic. He is canon neurodivergent. Because actually says in the show that he is OCD. Um, so um, So we're going to talk a little bit about Sheldon, and we're going to talk about empathy and what people mean when they might say, "Oh, my peer or my employee or whatever doesn't seem to have much empathy." There are really two kinds of empathy that psychologists talk about when they talk about empathy, and one is actually expressing affective empathy is actually expressing. That how somebody feels, and or responding appropriately, quote unquote, in some way to somebody else who's having feelings. But what comes before that, and what's necessary in order to have affective empathy, is cognitive empathy. And that is that you actually understand how somebody else is feeling. Now, there is a lot of research that has been done on empathy, and particularly with autistics. And there is new research out now that calls a lot of previous research into question. And there is, a lot of discussion right now about whether we should be using this. It's also called theory of mind, cognitive empathy. Whether we should be using this concept, how valid it is, et cetera, et cetera. There is no question, though, and of course, whether how common it is in autistics or other kinds of neurodivergence. I think that without stating, this is what autistics are like, blah blah blah, because of course that's across the board. Anyway, without going there, I think that it is pretty safe to say that this is there are definitely differences in how well people detect what other people are feeling and thinking. And we can call that, at least for now, research is out, a lot is still being done. That is commonly called theory of mind. And this is how it works with Sheldon. Like, if you haven't seen this series, I actually binged it in like 2 months. It was 12 seasons. This was a huge project. Very, very dedicated to my TV watching sometimes. But the whole series, to me, is about Sheldon and Penny. And Sheldon is this very typical neurodivergent, and Penny represents a very typical neurotypical. And you get conversations like this between them. This is pretty early in the show. I'm going to give you a second just to read. So, very typical interaction between Sheldon and Penny, where Sheldon comes over, he states something, he's very direct, this is how I'm feeling. And Penny says, well, imagine how I'm feeling. And he's like, yeah, this isn't really my strong suit. And this is a recurring theme throughout the show that Sheldon cannot really put himself in other people's shoes. He has a big gap when it comes to cognitive empathy because he's not Penny. They're very, very different. He can't necessarily assume whether she is feeling upset or frustrated or hungry or what. And he actually trains her and other characters throughout the series to be more direct with their feelings. At the same time, he trains himself a variety of ways to improve his cognitive empathy. And when he's not training himself to do that, he's trying to come up with an app or a robot or something else that will help him with his cognitive empathy. So we see that it actually is something that can be improved. It's a skill, and it is something that can be improved, as well as sort of helping everyone else in your environment to be more direct about their feelings. Like for example, oh, and then once he actually I'm going to do this out of order. So at some point he says, just tell me if you're uncomfortable, because Sheldon has brought up a topic that is sensitive for Penny. And she's getting mad at him. And he says, just tell me if this is uncomfortable. And she leans over and yells in his face, I'm uncomfortable, Sheldon. And he's like, cool, thank you. That's very helpful. Now I know. And this is just one of the ways that he sort of tries to help other people communicate with him better. Um, Once he understands how people are feeling, though, and this is not just about Sheldon. I'm only bringing Sheldon up because this is sort of textbook neurodivergent stuff, especially autistic stuff. Once he understands how other people are feeling, he's this incredibly helpful, kind, sensitive, loving person. And I picked out for this slide all of the moments in the show that kind of made me cry, or that really touched me about how Sheldon helped Penny or apologized or was able to deeply resonate with somebody else's feelings. And a friend had convinced me to watch the show. And so I sent her this little part of this presentation that I was working on. And she's like, I can't believe you made a slide with every moment in the show that made me cry. And I was like, yeah, I know, me too. Because those are all the points where Sheldon shows that he is capable of great empathy, of great feeling, and of really identifying well with people and understanding people, and trying to be helpful. And most neurodivergents are the same. We have that affective empathy. We just don't necessarily get there through cognitive empathy the same way. And we might have to adjust the things that we do, which managers can help with. And or we may have to help others around us communicate their feelings better rather than making us guess, which again, managers and peers can be very supportive of. All right, so that is all the Sheldon stuff. Let's talk a little bit about productivity. Is anybody need a moment? All right. Yeah, uh all of the really touching moments of the show. I have to kind of relive it every time. But let's talk a little bit about productivity because of course, neurodivergent minds have differences in terms of productivity too. And this mainly comes into play when we talk about executive functioning skills. So again, this can be the case with anxiety, with depression, with trauma, with autism, with ADHD. A lot of different types of neurodivergence can have differences in terms of executive functioning. And I've underlined the ones on screen that tend to be most relevant where productivity is concerned. Focus, task initiation, planning and prioritization, organization, time management. If you have somebody on your team, whether who a direct report or a peer, or maybe it's you, who tends to have issues in this area, or at least differences in this area, then you might want to look a little bit further afield than the typical productivity tips and hacks and whatever. Our brains don't necessarily do things in the same way. Excuse me. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring in three of my top tips for managing these areas, because I can't say that if somebody is autistic, they'll have issues in this area. If somebody's ADHD, they'll have issues in this area. That it's the world simply is more complicated than that, and brains are more complicated than that. And in addition to that, as I think a lot of us know, um, we don't even necessarily know that we're autistic or ADHD or whatever. Lewis was just telling me about somebody that he knows, who has been diagnosed late in life. I was diagnosed autistic at 40, ADHD a couple of years later. I have colleagues all the time now tell me, oh, I think that, I'm going to pursue a diagnosis in this or that, especially women, because diagnostic criteria tends to be written for and focused on men, and men's presentations. And we tend to, and doctors tend to actually interpret things in a more specific way, or in a male specific way. So I've got to get off that topic now and go into the organization. But I'm just saying that you don't necessarily know who on your team is neurodivergent. But if you have people who have differences in these areas, here are some tips to help them with that productivity. This is, I think, more than anything, a more traditional tip: productivity. Break tasks into small pieces. This can, and it's something that always sounded kind of dumb to me. I was like, oh, my brain can, can figure that out. No, really. I need to break tasks into very small pieces so that they don't seem insurmountable to me. I also use something called Goblin tools to help me break tasks into very small pieces, and it will even let you choose like how far things need to be broken down. And so for very, very low executive function days, I need to break things down into very, very small tasks so that I can get that dopamine hit of crossing things off the list more often, so that that keeps me going, and gives me more motivation and helps my focus. This is especially helpful, I think, as a peer, body doubling or co-working. I do this all the time, actually, especially as a solo consultant. When I have project work that I need to do, I just get on a call with somebody else. We don't talk. We don't hold each other accountable, although some people might do this as part of that. But we just work together. And especially as a remote worker, I love being a remote worker. I've said, like I don't ever want to go back in the office. I love being able to manage my sensory inputs. That's very important to my productivity. But at the same time, I like to be able to do body doubling and co-working, to have somebody there when I want to be productive. It just helps a ton. I also, by the way, use this a lot with my kids, because they just need somebody there. If anybody who has kids who just want you to do things like just sit in my room while I clean it, that's body doubling, and that actually has a name, and it's huge neurodivergent tendency, but not necessarily. Okay, but it just helps for us to have a little bit of social input. And particularly, I think for ADHD, I love to try to give myself fake earlier deadlines. So because being on deadline helps the dopamine, for me to actually get things done. And I want to encourage everybody to sort of be careful with this, because you don't want to be on deadline like really, really stressed out all the time, that's a good way to burn out. But for me, it helps me to set some earlier deadlines for myself so that I get the dopamine that helps me do the thing a little bit earlier. And then I end up with time to actually do the thing. Because, of course, the later and later that I've gotten in my career, I used to be able to just, throw together a paper the night before, even all the way through college. I pulled all-nighters and always wrote things the night before. But as I have gotten into bigger and bigger projects, more serious things, throughout my career, I can't necessarily do that anymore because they are things that you simply can't do the night before. And so sitting on doing that on earlier deadlines helps a tremendous amount so that I give myself time. I give myself more time with the dopamine response to actually do the thing. And it's extremely helpful. So again, I want to caution, don't do that all the time because you will end up burning yourself out. But it is if you're having difficulty starting something or kind of slogging your way through the middle of a project, imposing an earlier deadline and trying to also make it, if you can, externalize it a little bit. So you're going to present it to somebody. Maybe you're going to present it to your body doubling or co-working partner, so that you can't just blow past it and not take it seriously just because it's self-imposed. So that is that was so much. But this is a huge topic. And I would love it. I would absolutely love it if people would message me on LinkedIn or email me and tell me what other issues they have as a neurodivergent worker, as a manager of a neurodivergent worker, maybe as a designer who is designing things for neurodivergence. If you have any other issues that you need to address, I would love it for you to message me and tell me what they are, because there's so much that can be put into this particular topic. And also, just to wrap up, are there any other questions? You guys have done a great job of keeping the chat going and throwing in questions and comments. Thank you so much for your participation. It's been a very fun session for me to do. But if you have any final questions, let's go ahead and talk about them.
Wow, you went pretty much the full hour, Judy. That's amazing.
I know.
Really great. Thank you.
I'm always trying to there's so much here, and
Yeah, yeah,
I want to give something that's really helpful in all of these categories, but it's challenging. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
yeah. No, it seems like you definitely could have gone much longer.
Oh, yes, yes.
All right, I'm just looking. I'm not seeing any questions pop up. It really was great, Judy.
Well, I
Thank you so
appreciate the
much.
feedback though. This is
Yeah,
yeah, I love it when, it's such an honor for people to take an hour out of their day.
yeah.
So thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate all your comments and your feedback.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Let's see. We have Christy Tucker closing out the event
Hey.
today. If any of you are familiar with Christy at all, you'll know that she's incredible, has made a huge impact in L&D. The stuff that she is posting in LinkedIn, especially, like, she's been really productive with some of her AI stuff over the last couple of years. But please return for that. We'll be wrapping everything up. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, close everything out, and we'll see everybody in the next one. Thanks again, Judy.
Thank you.